There is a particular kind of fading that doesn't happen all at once. It starts quietly, almost politely, as if life is slowly dimming the lights rather than turning them off. You notice it in the smallest places first. The hobbies you used to enjoy but now postpone. The conversations you reply to a little slower. The mornings that feel heavier, even though nothing terrible has happened. You don't wake up one day feeling empty. Instead, you wake up one day realizing you've been empty for a while. It's not laziness and it's not apathy. Not in the careless sense. It's more like your emotions began stepping back, one by one, until you stopped remembering what genuine excitement feels like. People say, find joy again, but they don't understand that you've been trying. You've been waiting for your heart to spark, but instead it feels quieter, thinner, more tired than it should. And the most painful part is how invisible this is. You can function, work, talk, smile, yet inside something feels like it's slowly dissolving. A soft withdrawal from your own life that even you can't fully explain. When someone slowly loses interest in life, the world often assumes it is a simple lack of motivation. But psychologically, the mechanism is far more complex and far more human. The mind does not shut down without reason. It retreats because something inside has been running beyond its natural limits. One explanation is emotional burnout. Not the dramatic kind, but a long, low-grade exhaustion built from years of carrying too much without enough restoration. When the brain is overwhelmed for too long, it begins conserving energy in the only way it knows how, by reducing emotional responsiveness. What feels like losing interest is often the nervous system moving into a protective mode, numbing stimulation to prevent collapse. Another layer is anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. It can arise from chronic stress, unresolved grief, or even prolonged self-suppression. The reward system dims, not because life is meaningless, but because the mind has been conditioned to expect disappointment faster than it expects fulfillment. There is also the slow shaping force of learned helplessness. After enough failures, betrayals, or losses, the psyche internalizes a quiet belief that nothing it does will make a difference. This belief rarely speaks aloud. It lives instead as a shrinking of effort, a silent retreat from desire. Some people lose interest due to overstimulation fatigue. Too much noise, too many expectations, too many emotional roles to perform. When a person has been constantly on, the body eventually forces a shutdown of enthusiasm so the system can stabilize. And then there is identity drift, the slow disconnection from the self. When someone has spent years adapting, pleasing, or surviving, they may reach a point where they no longer feel aligned with their own life. Interests fade not because they are gone, but because the self that once held them has become blurry. In all these cases, losing interest is not a moral failure. It is an adaptive response to sustained psychological pressure. The mind is protecting itself, even when the protection feels like a prison. There is a paradox in slowly losing interest in life. It feels both like a problem and a relief. At first, the distancing feels protective. You stop caring so much about things that once overwhelmed you. The noise of expectations softens. The emotional storms you used to battle become faint echoes. There is a quietness to losing interest that can feel like rest, as if life is finally asking less of you. But the price of that quietness reveals itself slowly. When interest fades, so does contrast. Without contrast, emotions flatten. Without emotions, meaning thins. Without meaning, even rest stops feeling restorative. What began as self-protection becomes a quiet erosion of aliveness. The paradox deepens. The very sensitivity that once allowed you to feel deeply is the same sensitivity that now shuts down to avoid pain. People who lose interest in life are not cold. They are often those who once felt too much. Their emotional wiring was built to notice subtleties, to care intensely, to hold more than most. But intensity is costly. When the world repeatedly overwhelms a sensitive system, the psyche learns to dim itself. The heart becomes cautious. The mind becomes selective. And the soul learns to live in a smaller emotional range to survive. Another layer of the paradox lies in intelligence. Those who think deeply eventually encounter the limits of their own understanding. Overthinking, when prolonged, becomes a form of paralysis. The mind analyzes its way out of desire, out of fun, out of spontaneity. It can predict disappointment before joy even has the chance to appear. Curiosity collapses under the weight of internal logic. You lose interest not because life has nothing to offer, but because your mind has already run simulations of every possible outcome and quietly concluded, it's not worth the effort. The price of such mental sharpness is subtle. You stop chasing dreams because you can already imagine how they might fail. You stop forming deep connections because you can already foresee how they might end. You stop beginning things because the endings are too vivid. You lose interest not from emptiness, but from predictive exhaustion. Then comes the problem of independence. Society praises the self-sufficient, the ones who rely on no one, who build their own world. But deep independence, when forged through emotional necessity rather than choice, has a hidden cost. It disconnects you from the nourishment of shared life. The more capable you become at surviving alone, the easier it is to withdraw entirely. Interest fades because nothing pulls you outward anymore. No bond, no hope, no community feels safe enough to lean into. You become your own entire world, but that world becomes too small for meaning to live in. There is also the paradox of emotional survival. The psyche learns that if it cannot prevent pain, it can at least prevent attachment. A person who loses interest in life may not be disengaging from everything. They may simply be disengaging from vulnerability. Every disappointment, every betrayal, every moment of being unseen or unheard teaches the mind to stop seeking. And without seeking, interest withers. Even joy becomes complicated. To feel joy is to risk losing it. To hope is to risk being broken again. To love is to risk being abandoned. The mind calculates the cost and decides that neutrality is safer. Emotional numbness becomes a shield, and the absence of interest becomes the armor. But this armor has a price. An invisible, existential price. When you withdraw from pain, you also withdraw from beauty. When you disconnect from longing, you disconnect from meaning. When you reduce your emotional world to avoid chaos, you also reduce the possibilities of feeling alive. What protects you also imprisons you. The paradox turns into a quiet grief, the grief of watching your own life pass by without feeling part of it. You function, but do not participate. You exist, but do not inhabit. You move, but do not arrive. And somewhere inside you know that something essential is slipping away. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but with the softness of disappearing smoke. The price of slowly losing interest in life is not just the absence of joy. It is the shrinking of the self, the thinning of presence, the slow forgetting of what it feels like to want. When the loss of interest stretches long enough, it stops being just a psychological state and becomes an existential question. A quieter, heavier inquiry begins to surface beneath the daily functioning. What does it mean to live a life that no longer pulls me forward? The emptiness that once felt like exhaustion now feels like a void, one that is not loud, but deeply persuasive. In this emptiness, time changes texture. Days do not feel distinct. They slide into one another with a soft sameness. Moments that should feel significant lose their weight, as if life is happening behind a window you cannot quite open. You are present, yet somehow not fully here. This distance creates a strange tension. Part of you wants to come back to life, but another part is afraid of returning to a world that once overwhelmed or disappointed you. The existential tension becomes clearer. Humans are not designed to be passionless. We are built with longing, curiosity, desire, and contradiction. When these inner forces go silent, it is not just mood that collapses, it is identity. Who are you without the things that once moved you? Without the dreams that once shaped the future? Without the emotional palette that once colored the world? Losing interest confronts you with a deeper truth. Meaning is not something life gives you automatically. Meaning is something that emerges when emotion and attention collide. When your emotional capacity dims, meaning becomes harder to grasp, not because it has vanished, but because the part of you that interprets reality has gone offline. This is why the loss of interest can feel like losing direction. Without inner fire, the compass inside you stops pointing anywhere. Even small decisions feel weighty. Even simple plans feel ambiguous. You stand in front of your own life the way someone stands in front of an unreadable map. Everything looks familiar, yet nothing feels like a path. Here lies another existential dilemma. Wanting to feel alive again demands that you confront the parts of yourself you have ignored, suppressed, or abandoned. But confronting them requires energy you no longer have. You want clarity without the discomfort of introspection. You want purpose without the risk of choosing wrong. You want feeling without the vulnerability of being open again. The psyche becomes trapped between desire and fear. The tension widens further when you realize that emotional numbing does not stop time. You age regardless of how alive you feel. Opportunities pass whether you reach for them or not. The world keeps moving, and your distance from it becomes a quiet ache. You look at your own life the way someone watches a train leaving the station, aware that you are supposed to be on it, yet unable to step forward. This creates a philosophical crisis. If living requires wanting, and wanting requires vulnerability, then avoiding vulnerability leads to something that resembles existence, but not living. You begin to wonder whether the absence of interest is a temporary phase or a new self. You question whether meaning is something you have lost or something you never truly found. And underneath all of this, another question emerges, softer but heavier. Is there a way back? The existential weight does not come from hopelessness. It comes from the feeling that you are suspended between two worlds. The world you inhabit physically, and the world you can no longer access emotionally. You become a witness to yourself, watching your own distance grow, unsure how to close it. The psychology of losing interest merges seamlessly with the philosophy of meaning. You cannot separate them anymore. To lose interest is to lose the thread that ties you to your own existence. It is to stand inside your life like a stranger, surrounded by familiar things that no longer speak your name. And yet, the very fact that you notice this quiet dissonance, this longing for something you cannot articulate, means that something inside you is still alive. The crisis, painful as it is, becomes a doorway. The emptiness becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, a question lingers, not as despair, but as an invitation. What kind of life would make you want to return to yourself? The path back is never sudden. Life does not return in a rush. An interest does not explode back into existence like a forgotten firework. Instead, the process of healing begins in places so small they are almost invisible. Places that ask for honesty rather than enthusiasm. Gentleness rather than force. When someone has slowly lost interest in life, the instinct is often to fix themselves quickly, to chase motivation, to search for a spark powerful enough to break through the numbness. But healing does not arrive through intensity. It arrives through permission. Permission to move slowly, to feel inconsistently, to begin again without needing to be fully alive all at once. The first step is acknowledging the truth you have been avoiding. You cannot return to life by bypassing yourself. For years, you may have endured more than you processed, given more than you received, silenced more than you admitted. The loss of interest was not a failure. It was an internal signal that something essential had been neglected. Healing begins the moment you stop treating this signal as an enemy and start treating it as a guide. Reconnecting with life often starts with micro-meaning, not passions, not goals, not grand visions. Just the smallest, most human anchors. Noticing warmth, noticing movement, noticing breath. Meaning grows when the mind learns to feel the world again, piece by tiny piece. Emotional numbness cannot be shattered, but it can be softened through gentle sensory invitations. The warmth of sunlight, the comfort of a particular texture, the familiarity of a quiet space where you allow yourself to exist without performance. Another part of recovery is learning to stop betraying yourself. Self-betrayal, accumulated over years, is one of the deepest contributors to emotional shutdown. Every time you forced yourself into roles that drained you, every time you silenced your needs to avoid conflict, every time you pretended to be fine when you were quietly breaking, the psyche learned that authenticity was unsafe. To regain interest in life, you must rebuild the trust between you and yourself. Slowly, sincerely, through small acts of honesty. You also heal by shrinking life into manageable pieces. A numbed mind cannot handle the weight of finding purpose, but it can handle the next 10 minutes. It can handle a single small task. It can handle a moment of openness. Life becomes possible again when you stop demanding magnitude and start allowing yourself to exist in increments. And then comes reconnection, not with the world at large, but with your own inner world. Sometimes the loss of interest comes from living a life that was never truly yours. Perhaps your goals were inherited, your personality edited, your desires filtered. When you reconnect with the small truths you buried, the preferences, the boundaries, the forgotten joys, you begin to reclaim the version of yourself who once cared. Interest grows in the presence of alignment. When you stop forcing yourself to be someone you're not, your system naturally starts to wake up. As your connection with yourself rebuilds, you'll notice something subtle. Moments begin to register again. Not constantly, not dramatically, but enough to remind you that your emotional world is still capable of opening. A brief sense of curiosity, a small laugh you didn't expect, a moment of peace you didn't have to earn. These flickers are not signs that you are back. They are signs that you are returning. And returning is enough. The ending of this journey is not a triumphant arrival. It is a quiet reunion, a gentle recognition that you were not broken, just tired, overwhelmed, and in need of a softer way to exist. You do not have to chase your old self. You are allowed to become a new one, a quieter one, a more honest one. One who does not force interest but allows it to grow naturally, like light re-entering a long-closed room. Slowly, life becomes something you meet again, not with intensity, but with readiness. The readiness to feel, the readiness to try, the readiness to exist in a way that does not require constant performance. And that is where interest returns, not as a spark, but as a gentle unfolding. A coming home to yourself,